Hi there. My name is Zach Embry, and today my presentation will be on the neurobiology of trauma. I'll be talking a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. This is a well-established mental health condition that impacts many people. It has been shown to be caused by a singular traumatic event or even by prolonged exposure to stress. There are many symptoms associated with PTSD, such as severe anxiety, depression, and many others. First, I want to look at the stress response and how our mind and body respond to stressful stimulus. So during a stressful event, the autonomic nervous system is triggered. This is comprised of both the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for calming our body and is known as the rest and digest system. The sympathetic nervous system is triggered immediately when a stressor is perceived. This is known as the flight or fight response. This increases the production of adrenaline and helps a person react quickly to stress while suppressing other parts of the body, like appetite, that aren't useful during a stressful event. Another system that's enacted during the stress response that I want to spend some time on is known as the HBA axis. HBA stands for hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, adrenal cortex. And so when stress happens, our hypothalamus releases a corticotropin releasing hormone known as CRH, and this gets released into the anterior pituitary, and that releases the adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH, and that travels through the bloodstream until it goes into the adrenal cortex, and that produces cortisol. Cortisol then has a negative feedback on CRH and ACTH to eventually promote homeostasis. So some more about the HBA axis when it's activated during stress. This is what keeps the fight or flight response in the sympathetic nervous system going. The cortisol, it's a way for it to provide energy to the fight or flight response. Cortisol has anti-inflammatory properties that helps us cope with stress. And as I mentioned, it has this negative feedback on ACTH and CRH to promote homeostasis. And as we perceive stress dissipating, the HBA axis then begins to shut off. And this is when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in to recover from stress. And now moving towards a dysregulated HBA axis. This happens when the HBA axis undergoes a traumatic event or chronic stress and disrupts the negative feedback loop. Excessive cortisol is released, and this has been found to have adverse impacts on the brain. Some of these impacts are a reduction in the volume of the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. This could lead to impairments in the ability to handle stress and impulse control. Another impact found is an increase in the amygdala. This heightens hypervigilance and distorts the ability to recognize threatening stimulus. And one study that I found, researchers found that the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA has been shown to decrease in a dysregulated HBA axis. This is significant because GABA helps with the HBA axis's ability to turn off. So when dysregulated, the HBA axis produces an influx of CRH. And so that GABA is really what's needed to downregulate that CRH. And in a regulated system, the neurosteroid allopregnanolone increases GABA signaling. So next, I did some research and learned about the impacts of inflammation and how that shows up in people diagnosed with PTSD. Heightened levels of inflammatory cytokines were found in patients with PTSD. As mentioned earlier, the dysregulated HBA axis system produces lower levels of cortisol, and that promotes inflammation because cortisol has anti-inflammatory properties that are needed. An increase of inflammation has been linked with lower hippocampus volume. This is significant because a functional hippocampus identifies safe or threatening situations. And so with a less functioning hippocampus, This can lead to the inability to distinguish between what is safe and what is dangerous. Another area of the brain in which inflammation occurs is the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. This manages emotional regulation and also threat recognition. People diagnosed with PTSD were found to have a dorsal anterior cingulate cortex with a reduced volume. And that's significant because people with PTSD demonstrated poor performance with overall executive functioning. And then I also looked at how trauma impacts the developing brain, so adolescents, children, infants, and as early as utero, trauma can happen. So neural circuits that help differentiate between touch and pain are constructed near the end of pregnancy term. So that makes children who are born preterm more vulnerable to develop chronic pain disorders later on in life. The amygdala's ability to balance excitation and inhibition is fine-tuned in adulthood, so it's still underdeveloped in children. So this means stress from traumatic events, physical or emotional, caused from sensory input can alter the amygdala, and that has been shown to lead to chronic pain, inflammation, and other kinds of psychological disorders. One study that I found showed that the impacts of sexual abuse in children 3 to 5 had been shown to correlate with a smaller volume of hippocampus, whereas children 9 to 14, sexual abuse was linked to dysfunctions in the corpus callosum and prefrontal cortex. And another impact on the developing brain was shown to be neglect. And one study showed structural changes, including stunting, atrophy, or hyperatrophy of dendrites, and altered the number of synapses and their function. Institutionalized children showed greater right amygdala volume. The structural shift was also seen in adults with parental verbal abuse, physical abuse, and bullying. And the amygdala in this state was also more resistant to change, which may contribute to the high instances of emotional issues in the lives of these children of adults. And so really just with an underdeveloped brain, children and younger people are just more vulnerable to trauma since they don't have the fully developed stress systems that we do in adulthood. Yeah, but fortunately I was able to find some potential therapeutic interventions, mindfulness practice, exercise. These have been found to alleviate a lot of symptoms of PTSD, including a decrease in inflammation. It does this by strengthening the brain to modulate subcortical cells that are normally used to trigger inflammation. Exercise has also shown evidence of decreasing inflammation. Exercise is also shown to increase neuroplasticity, synaptic connectivity, and even neurogenesis. It's a really cool study I found on ketamine, and that was found to quickly increase synaptic connectivity and reverse the side effects of chronic stress. One study I found that was done on animals on a single dose of ketamine produced an increase in dendritic spines. This was promising in potentially showing that ketamine can promote neuroplasticity. Study was also saying that ketamine's effectiveness could be maximized by using it in conjunction with therapeutic interventions such as EMDR, exposure therapies, amongst many others. Brexanolone is a pharmaceutical drug linked with restoring the HPA axis. So brexanolone is a pharmaceutical application of allopregnanolone. As mentioned earlier, this is a neurosteroid that increases GABA during the stress response. And this is vital for the HPA axis to shut off to promote homeostasis. Yeah. And so in conclusion, in learning about trauma and the brain and the neurobiology behind it, the HPA axis was a key system. It's really important during the stress response. The brain in particular plays an important part in regulating the response and integration of stress and traumatic events. And synaptic connectivity is vital for cognitive function so that the brain can make appropriate connections in order to pass information from one area of the brain to another. This enables the ability for us to assess danger and send signals to the body that it's safe, and we can begin to activate the parasympathetic nervous system so we can rest and recover from stressful stimulus. Inflammation is a feature of PTSD symptomology, showing that trauma exists all the way to the cellular level. Fortunately, as the research show, there are many interventions that can be used to alleviate PTSD. And overall, there's still needs to be much research done to further understand the impacts of trauma and the ways it can reduce trauma's impact. Yeah, thank you.